The following is based on real events.
All right, class, settle down. It's just Tuesday, it's just world history. Yes, thank you, I appreciate it. Anyways, today we're looking at England. As you can hopefully see by the map, that shouldn't be a surprise to any of you. That is England.
Wait, that's England? You're telling me England's an island?
Hold up. You didn't know England was an island? What did you think it was?
I mean, I thought it was right above the United States.
No, that would be Canada. Well, that certainly was a true interaction. I don't do that to poke fun of the student that said that. I do it to point out the fact that, sometimes as teachers we forget that some things that are, basic knowledge for us aren't necessarily something that our students know right away. And hopefully today, as we talk more about England, it becomes something that can educate you a little bit more about something maybe you didn't know. All right, if you haven't figured it out yet, yes, we're talking about England today. And remember, everything we've been talking about in Unit 3 so far is the world in response to the fall of Rome. What are things like after Rome falls? And really, when Rome falls in Europe, it triggers a period that historians often call the Dark Ages. Now, it has nothing to do with light during that time. It wasn't like everyone was literally living in darkness, but it is a historically dark period because we don't have a ton of information about it. But what we do know is that there are a number of different kingdoms that emerge within Europe after the fall of the Roman Empire. And one of those is the Kingdom of England. Now, most people would say, England started in about 1066 with the events of William the Conqueror and Battle of Hastings and all of that. You'll get that eventually. Don't worry, I'll get to it. You'll understand the reference. But there's so much more that goes on in the formation of England as we know it. We have to go back to the beginning. And we have to remember that, yes, in fact, England was an island, and because of that, it was mostly secluded from the rest of the world. But that all changed when the Romans arrived at the height of Roman conquest. In 43 AD, the island of England was conquered by Roman soldiers under the leadership of the Emperor Claudius. And with Hadrian's Wall constructed in 122, England became a very productive province for the Roman Empire, most specifically its capital city of Londinium. It's London. And as Rome began to change, so did this island as well, which was considered to be relatively primitive in comparison to the Roman Empire, which was this beacon of what it meant to be a citizen and to be an advanced modern Roman. But this progress was ended in about 430 AD when Roman soldiers were pulled out of England and the entire province was abandoned because Rome had to defend itself from the frequent barbarian invasions that were toppling its nation. As Rome began to topple in 476, the world was going to be completely different. Remember, the advances of the Huns and all these other barbarian tribes displaced different groups. Two groups in particular had to leave the continent of mainland Europe entirely. They were the Saxons and the Angles. And they quickly moved across the English Channel into England and made that island their home. Despite their Germanic origins, the Anglo Saxons would be the foundation for the creation of modern England in the Dark and Middle Ages. Quickly, the Anglo-Saxons consolidated into several smaller kingdoms, most specifically Northumbria, Mercia, East Anglia, and the most powerful in the south, Wessex. It's interesting how these kingdoms all have their own different identities, yet together still envisioned some similar heritage. And most specifically, Wessex believed that all these kingdoms should be united under one kingdom, the dream of eventually creating a unified England. And despite different heritage and different localized systems of governance and all of that made these kingdoms different, there was one thing that began to truly tie them together, even more so than their heritage. It was their faith. Rome's influence certainly brought Christian principles towards the end of its reign in England. However, it was the efforts of the church itself after the fall of Rome that truly Christianized England, specifically the missionary efforts of Augustine, who was sent in 590, and other missionaries like Patrick, yes, St. Patrick, who traveled to that area. Their shared Christian faith kept these Saxon kingdoms unified, and at the Council of Whitby in 664, they officially aligned themselves within the Roman Catholic tradition. Remember, despite Rome's fall, the church and the Byzantine Empire survived. The church was now known as the Roman Catholic Church, and it carried on Roman tradition, which allowed these Anglo-Saxon kingdoms to be connected not only to the church, but truly to Rome's legacy itself. But despite the Wessex dream for a unified England, most of these kingdoms remained independent of each other. However, that all began to change in the late 600s and early 700s, when a new invader would change the course of English history forever. Sweet Odin's raven, is that who I think it is? Yes, it's the Vikings!
Well, technically, if you want to be historically correct, it was the Danes. They didn't call themselves the Vikings, but they were from Scandinavia, and they were a fearsome, warlike people who began to invade England, specifically conquering the kingdom of Northumbria in 865.
Now, personally, I'm not scared of any Vikings. The Vikings tend to choke every time they get to the Super Bowl, not to mention Kirk Cousins is not a clutch quarterback. Oh, wait, we're talking about the historical Vikings, right? Yeah, the historical Vikings were a fearsome group. Scandinavia was a cold area, and because of that, they were constantly seeking new land that was better to live on, and England represented that. The Anglo Saxon kingdoms also had riches and wealth that the Vikings came in to raid. The Danish conquest of Northumbria announced to England that England was not safe just because it was an island. Once the Danes were there were only going to be more that would come. So truly, the Anglo-Saxon existence was threatened by the Danes.
It quickly became clear that the Danes weren't going anywhere as they established their own empire within England called the Danelaw.
Ah, Dane it, said every Anglo-Saxon. Get it? The survival of the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms was vital to each of its rulers. And it became clear that the best way to fight off the Danes was to unite together, to form this vision of England that the kings of Wessex had long wanted. And it just so happens at that time the perfect leader to do so was King of Wessex. His name was Alfred.
Despite really only being king of Wessex, Alfred is technically England's first true king. He began a military alliance between the remaining Saxon kingdoms and was able to begin to conflict with the Danelaw. He also encouraged a focus on education and Latin writing that made Wessex and fellow kingdoms more like what Rome was. At the Battle of Edington in 878, Alfred was able to defeat the Danes and set a clear boundary between Wessex and the Danelaw. In the aftermath of that battle, Alfred also struck up a friendship with Guthrum, the leader of the Vikings at that time, who eventually converted to Christianity. This allowed for better relations between the Danes and the people of Wessex and other Anglo-Saxon kingdoms.
Alfred's greatness went beyond the battlefield. He was viewed as merciful and gracious. He was a leader that people wanted to follow. Despite the fact he wasn't ever even meant to really be on the throne, he took over after his brother died. Alfred was truly a man of God, and it was using this faith that he was able to connect these Saxon kingdoms and really set the groundwork for what would be a united England.
Alfred did die before his dream of England becoming a united nation became a reality, but his successor, Aethelstan, became England's first true king.
With a clear boundary set between the Kingdom of England and the Kingdom of Danelaw and everything else Alfred had done, it seemed like England was on the fast track to success. Sweet Thor's hammer, they're back again, the Vikings!
That's right, the Danes never truly go away. A second wave of Danish and Scandinavian attacks, led this time by the leader Sven Forkbeard in 1013, led to a united Danish kingdom in England, conquering what Alfred had worked so hard to build.
Side note, can we talk about how awesome Viking names are? Not only do you have names like Thor and Sven, you also have these very literal nicknames that go after them that describe the people. I wonder what my Viking nickname would be. Cain the something. Let's check. Viking name generator, put in your name. Cain. Cain the beardless. I mean, I get that I can't really grow a nice beard, but the Vikings don't have to make fun of me for it. Besides, this baby face and clean-cut look, that never goes out of style. At least, that's what I tell myself. Anyways, England went from now being a united kingdom with Danes on the border to now being ruled completely by the Danes as a part of their massive North Sea empire that encompassed places like Scandinavia and chunks of England and even some areas in mainland Europe.
The greatest ruler of this North Sea empire was Knut the Great, who ruled England specifically from 1016 to 1035. Historians tell us that he was called the king of all England, Denmark, the Norwegians, and some of the Swedes.
Some of the Swedes, that was literally part of his title. But again, the Vikings are pretty literal. The reason we recognize Knut, however, is even though he was a Dane, he truly ruled England as if it was English. Some of that was probably the fact that he converted to Christianity, even journeyed to Rome itself to visit with the Pope. Knut's sympathy towards the English people allowed there to still be this dream of a unified England. And just 7 years later, England would get back to what Alfred had dreamed.
In 1042, Edward the Confessor, a descendant of the House of Wessex, returned from exile and reclaimed the throne and reestablished the new English kingdom. This would be the height of Anglo Saxon kingdoms in England.
Edward was an effective ruler that echoed back to that of Alfred, a man of God who really worked for the people and more so for the unity of England as a whole. And here we see the dream of Anglo-Saxon England becoming a united nation, truly coming into fruition. And so while this period of the Dark Ages, from about 476 all the way about to 1000 or so, even though it's masked by all of these different land disputes between the Anglo-Saxons themselves and the Danes, there's light at the end of the tunnel. There is unity. We see survival, as well as the creation of a new state that's going to dominate global politics for most of world history. And so much of that echoes back to the structure created by both the Roman Empire and the Church. Maybe more importantly, the diversity within this small island. The combination of Roman, Germanic, Christian, Danish influences will all become a part of England. Yet the diversity can't be ignored either. Because when Edward dies, there are a number of different claims to the throne. In fact, so many that it becomes a little confusing. And the question of who should rule this new unified England is murkier than ever before. Who will emerge as England's new king? Well, the answer might surprise you. But that's a story for another day. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.